Hi, welcome to King Crochet. I am super excited to start this new How to Crochet series. So it's going to be really fun. For each new thing you learn, we're going to do a square. And by the time we're done with all of the videos, you're going to have enough squares to make yourself a cool little sampler blanket. So the first thing we're going to learn today is the single crochet. So before we do that, this would be the square you would make. But before we get started, I want to talk a little bit about what you're going to need. So to do this project, you are going to need, where's my crochet hook? A crochet hook. So this is a size H crochet hook. Can you see that? I don't know. Maybe not. The light's bad today. It's a dreary, cloudy day in the Seattle area. Makes it a little hard to see. For the blanket itself, I'm just going to use a basic acrylic yarn. This brand is Caron Simply Soft. I picked this one just because it is relatively soft. It's pretty easy to work with, and you can find it in just about any craft store. I know Joann's, Michael's, I think Walmart even carries it, and it comes in lots of different colors. So you can pick and choose what you'd like to do. You also should have a ruler so that you can measure your square, and a pair of scissors to cut your yarn. And finally, this is a yarn needle. It's also called a tapestry needle, so it's got a bigger eye so that you can fit a piece of yarn through it. And this is what you're going to use to weave in the ends when you're done with your project. So that is what you're going to need. And let's get started. First of all, to start a crochet project, you have to tie a slip knot in your yarn. So I do that by twisting my yarn and then pulling. So this is my loose end of my yarn, and this is what we call the working yarn that's attached to the ball of yarn. So I'm going to hold it, I'll twist it, and then I'll pull my working yarn through my loop. So now I have a loop of yarn. I can put my crochet hook in there, and then if I pull my working yarn a little bit, it'll tighten up my crochet hook, tighten up the yarn on my crochet hook. I don't need it really tight, but I do need it, not to be a gigantic big loop like this, because that would look really funny at the beginning of my project. So just snug it up a little bit. Now, first things first, I'm right-handed. If you're left-handed, then you'll do this opposite of me. So I hold the crochet hook in my right hand, and there's two main ways you can hold the crochet hook, and this really just depends on what you're comfortable with. There's no right or wrong answer about how to hold the hook. So I like to hold it like a knife, usually, so like this, with my hand on top. The other option is to hold it more like a pencil, so like this with my hand underneath, and both ways are totally fine. So try both ways, experiment a little bit, and see what is most comfortable for you. So most crochet projects start with what is called a chain. And even just the chain can be a little tricky when you're learning. So one key thing is how you hold the yarn. Some people hold this working yarn in different ways. I like to go over my index finger, under my next two, and over my pinky. And that makes it so that I have control. So if I pull on this, I can hold that yarn tight, so I can control how tight I'm holding my yarn. I'm squeezing it between my pinky and my ring finger. Different people do it different ways. And then I'll take my thumb and my middle finger to hold underneath the stitches I'm working on so that I have control here, so that I know exactly what I'm doing. One thing that you're going to need to know how to do is called a yarn over. Every single stitch in crochet is going to use a yarn over at some point. So that literally means you're bringing the yarn over the hook. So I actually kind of think of it as a hook under, because I usually bring my hook under the yarn, but it's the same thing. The yarn goes over or the hook goes under. So to do a chain, you're going to yarn over, and I'm going to pull this piece of yarn now through this loop. So the way I do that is I hook it, it gets stuck in the little notch on my crochet hook, and I like to turn this down so it's pointing at the bottom of the hole. If you look at this hole, I'm going to make it a little bigger again just so you can see. Maybe I am. If you look at this hole, you can see it's kind of got this shape where it's skinnier on the bottom and wider at the top. So if I turn my crochet hook this way, it's going to be harder to pull it through. But if I turn my crochet hook so that it's pointing down, so it matches the shape of that hole, it's going to be a lot easier to pull through. So, get back in here. So if I yarn over, and I grab that yarn and I turn my crochet hook so it's pointing at the bottom of that loop, then I can pull it through. So now I've made my first chain stitch, and I've got a new loop on my hook. I can move my holding fingers up a little bit, and then I can do the same thing. Yarn over, pull through the loop. Yarn over, pull through. And as I come out of the loop, I turn my crochet hook back up to make sure that loop doesn't fall off of the end of it. So it takes a little practice. And the goal is to get these as even as possible. And one thing that I really struggled with as I was learning is not making them too tight. Because if you make them too tight, then the next step is going to be really, really hard. So to make our square for our blanket, we need to make it, I'm going to make them all 6 inches wide and 6 inches long. So to make it 6 inches long, for me, that took me 25 stitches. So I'm going to do 25 chains. So I've already done 3. I'll do 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. And you've got your ruler handy, you can measure that out. This actually, I did a little bit looser this time, so I would need not quite 25 stitches. I could take a few of those out to make it 6 inches. And this, again, you might need some trial and error. So that's 6 inches long. Definitely want it to be as close to 6 inches as you can. Alright, so now we need to work back along this row because we're going to go zigzagging back and forth along this pattern. Row, row, row. And so we've got to turn around and go back the other way. So to turn, you do a chain, and depending on what project you're on, this chain will count as your first stitch, or sometimes it won't. For this project, we're going to count that first chain as our first stitch. So that's a chain. I'm not going to work into this stitch. I'm going to work in the next one. So before I do that, though, I'm going to go back just so I remember where I was. I want to talk about the stitches a little bit. If you look at a chain of crochet stitches, there's one side that has this V, and there's another side that has just one single bump coming out the back side. So when you work into a stitch, you actually want to usually work in this back bump because then it will leave this nice looking stitches on the bottom. For some projects it really doesn't matter, and if you're having trouble because it's harder to get into the back bump, then it's much easier to just go into one of these side loops, and that's okay to start. Alright, so I'm going to chain 1, and that's going to count as my first single crochet. Then I'm going to go to the next chain stitch. I'm going to go put my hook through that back bump. Then I'm going to yarn over, pull through just that back bump. So now I have 2 loops on my hook. I pulled this loop through the back bump of that first chain stitch. Now I'm going to yarn over. I'm going to pull this through both the loops on my hook. That is a single crochet, so we'll do another one. I'm going to insert my hook in that back bump of the chain. Then I'm going to yarn over and pull through just that back bump. So I have 2 loops on my hook. Yarn over and pull through both loops. Again, insert into the back bump. Yarn over, pull through 1 loop. Yarn over, pull through 2 loops. I'm going to do this all the way across. Through the back bump, pull through, yarn over, pull through both. Do this all the way across your starting chain. And I don't expect you to go as fast as I am, so go ahead and pause the video to catch up. I just want to show you the next row also, because then you're going to start working into the single crochets that you make on this row. And once you can do the next row, you'll be able to do the whole thing, and I'll show you how to finish it off here in a second. Alright, so I got to the end of this chain. Now to turn, again, I'm going to chain 1 to turn. And the chain 1 just gets us up as high as our single crochets are going to be. And make sure you do this a little bit loose or it's going to be hard to work into it next time. Then I'm going to turn this over. since I'm counting my chain as my first stitch, I'm not going to work into this first single crochet. So I'm going to skip this first one and work into the next one. So I'm going to insert my hook through both. So if you look at the top, you see that V again, right? You're going to go through both of the loops of that V. Yarn over and pull a loop through that stitch. Now you've got the 2 loops on your hook again, you can yarn over and pull through both. So whereas the chain, you only went through 1 loop, for all of the other stitches, usually you go through both. So we're going to insert through the stitch, yarn over and pull a loop up. Yarn over, pull through both loops. Insert through the stitch, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through both. Through the stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through both. Insert, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through both. So you're going to do this all the way across. When you get to the very end, here, I'll work over there real quick. So one common mistake when people are learning is figuring out how many stitches you have left. So here I've got 1 more V, right? That's another single crochet. And then because I counted that chain that I did as a stitch, I need to work into the chain also. So I'm going to go through just a loop for that chain, pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through 2. So if you didn't count that chain as a stitch, then I would have stopped at that last single crochet. But since we're counting the chain, the turning chain as a stitch, you have to work into that one also. So now we've done 2 rows of single crochet, and we're just going to keep working until we get to 6 inches. But here I've got this one that I've finished. So this was my starting yarn, and I worked all the way up till the end here. And one easy way, if you don't want to have to keep measuring the height since we're making squares, if you just fold your starting line up and see if it matches, well, now it's the same length, right? This was 6 inches, so this must be 6 inches too. So I know I've got my square 6 inches tall. And now I didn't tie this off yet because I wanted to show you what to do. So I just finished my last single crochet here, and this is what I would be at. To tie it off, I'm going to yarn over, pull through, and then pull the yarn all the way through. So I cut the yarn off the ball, and then I pull it all the way through. So now it's got a knot there, and I've got 2 loose threads. This is where the yarn needle comes in. So my starting yarn and my ending yarn, I'm going to thread it onto my yarn needle. Okay, so you thread your yarn onto the yarn needle, and I mean, you could wait until you have a whole bunch of squares done and then weave all of the ends in, but weaving ends is absolutely my 100% least favorite thing to do in crochet. So if I leave this all till the end of a blanket, I will never finish the blanket because I'll have all these beautiful squares, and then I'll think, oh no, I have to weave in the ends, and I will just let it sit undone. So my advice to you is weave them in as you go. If you leave a really, really long tail, you could wait to weave this side in and use this to sew the sides together, but we're not going to cover sewing squares together yet. We're going to wait till we have quite a few squares done. So I'm just going to show you how to weave in ends. And you'll have to weave in ends on basically any other project you make unless it is something where the ends can hide inside. Like my earring holders, I just put the ends on the back of the board and never weave them in, hooray. Anyway, to weave them in, you're going to want to go kind of back and forth and back, and you want to hide this end in here. So I'm just going to go in, I'm going to weave through some stitches, just hiding my yarn in here. And you see that it's all the way in between these stitches. You can't really see the needle on the other side. And so when I pull that yarn through, it's going to be completely hidden. I don't want to pull really tight because then it'll distort the shape of my fabric. So just pull that through, and then I'm going to keep going this way a little bit longer. And then to really lock it in there, I want to go a couple different directions. So I went this way. Now I'm going to backtrack. I'm going to come down a little bit, and I'm going to go back the other way through this next row. And there's no real science to it. You just kind of weave back and forth a little bit, and then I'll go back one more time just to really lock that in there. I would recommend weaving in more than I just wove into. I would recommend weaving in maybe 6 inches, because sometimes the end does tend to come out, and if it starts to peek out a little bit, I like to be able to just trim it off again instead of having to worry about having trimmed off too much yarn. Also, if you really want those ends hidden well and you don't want to deal with the bulk, you can split this yarn apart. So this yarn actually is made up of 4 strands, and you can weave each of these strands into your project individually. I almost never do this because that's just 4 times the weaving, but then it really locks the yarn in and it makes it nearly invisible. So if you want to do that, you can split apart the yarn and weave those in separately, but I'm not gonna. All right, then you just trim it off. You can pull it a little bit so it's sticking out, and then trim it, and then pull it back in to suck that in, and it's gone. You can't see that end at all. It looks like a nice clean corner, and it is ready to be part of a blanket. And do the same with the other side. I trimmed it off because I had a really long tail, just to make it a smaller tail to work with. So I'll thread my yarn needle. Oh, I hear a 2-year-old, 3-year-old coming down the stairs. And then I will weave this in. Maybe. Oops. Come through tail, come through tail, other side, there we go. Alright, weave that in a little bit more. You can go down, you can go up, you can go whichever way you want, whatever suits your fancy. With some stitches it's a little harder to weave it in and hide it because it's less dense, but with a single crochet it's really tightly packed, so it hides... What? Hi John, hold on a minute buddy. So it hides strings really well. Okay, so I went that way. I'm going to go down here. And I'm going to go back the other way. Just weaving it through those stitches. And back out this side. And then, so I went back, I went forth, and I'm going to go back again. So I always try and go at least 2 direction changes to lock it in better. Because you don't want it to come undone if your blanket or your shirt or your shawl or whatever it is you're making gets stretched out. So always go a few different directions. So now I've got that. It's woven in 3 different ways. I'm going to trim that off. Maybe. Okay. And there we have it. We have our first square for our sampler blanket. And it's okay. You might have to unweave that first row that you do several times before you get it looking nice. And if it doesn't look exactly like this, don't worry about it. It's a testament to how much you've learned and grown if your starting squares aren't quite as good as your finishing squares, and that's a-okay. So I'm really excited about this project, and I hope you'll join along with me in learning how to crochet. Your next video, I'm already percolating ideas. It's going to be learning the slip stitch and learning how to do front loop and back loop only, so that's going to be really fun. Oh, also, for each project, I wanted to have a free pattern to practice with. For this one, I don't have a specific free pattern because there's not a ton you can do with just single crochet. However, your bonus project, should you choose to accept it, is to find some cotton yarn. This one is Sugar and Cream. It's, again, available at most craft stores, and it comes in a lot of different colors, and I picked out a variegated one. Just variegated just means color changing. And you just make another one of these, but make it in cotton, and you've got yourself a washcloth. So that is your bonus project for this week. And I hope you have a lot of fun. Don't forget to subscribe and sign up for our email list, because I email out weekly new things that are happening, works that I'm working on, and I'd love to hear from you. So don't forget to subscribe. Happy crocheting!